Hello and welcome to Prague Will Find a Way podcast. I'm Jonathan Block.
And I'm Jay Valade.
And today, on this episode, episode 5, we're going to talk about a couple of new releases. As we mentioned at the end of the last episode, we've got the new Steve Wilson album, the new Trevor Rabin album, and then we're also going to talk about Carl Palmer's legacy, ELP legacy, his current project of keeping the ELP name alive. But first, news.
I don't think we have any new news.
We don't have any news this time. And actually, we have a lot to talk about, so we're just going to skip news anyways.
Yeah.
All right. Which would you prefer to start with, Steve or Trevor?
All right. So Steve Wilson's album just came out, the Harmony Codex.
Harmony Codex.
And I don't have the physical copy yet. I ordered it from Burning Shed, and it has not arrived.
And we're in the U.S., by the way, if you couldn't tell.
And but I've listened to it on Spotify a couple times. So we had talked about this in the last episode about the releasing of bits and pieces of albums, and that is the approach that Steve Wilson has taken on this, was to release a couple songs week by week to keep refreshing in your feed that he has this new album coming out. And personally, I think it was a little bit of a disservice to the music, because the album is not really there are songs, obviously, but It's not like a catchy singles kind of album to me. After a couple listens, I think it's more of the whole thing kind of flowing together, song to song, genre to genre. He's kind of all over the map on this. There have been reviews of people who are like, there's not enough guitars, there's too much, electronic stuff, but I kind of like that it's all over the map. Okay. And that, but I think it's going to be a grower album for me, that I'm going to have to listen to it a bunch of times to really get the roadmap.
It was just the 2 songs he put out before the release?
He put like 3.
3, okay. Would you consider...
4. He put 4 out. So
yeah, I didn't hear the other 2. I heard the first 2, but would you consider that he was pulling the closest things to singles out?
Not necessarily. The second one he did was like an 11-minute instrumental. So
okay. All right.
But he did an interview on a podcast called The Disruptors.
Yep.
And it's like a 2-hour interview, which I thought was fantastic. It was not, just music and techie kind of stuff, but it was all about his approach to music, his approach to the landscape of being a musician today. And I recommended it to you, but I recommend it to everybody to listen to if you have like 2 hours to listen to what they had to say. But he talked about that and said, I'm not Beyonce.
Right.
I have to kind of do this. The record company wants to do it this way, but I don't think that the music itself was best served that way. I think it kept it on my radar, for sure.
Yeah.
But I kind of wish I didn't listen to it until I got the full album.
Right.
But I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, I mean. And
anytime that happens, though, I'm always somebody's new thing comes out, and I got to listen to it.
Well, it also gives him 4 chances of getting in front of people that never heard him before, right?
Understood.
Yeah,
and but my point of that was that it's not that they're so catchy that it's like a hit single kind of thing that you're gonna like remember and be like, oh, so if you like them, you like them, and if you don't, I don't know that. But it will remind the fans that there is a Steve Wilson album coming out.
Right. It's like, who are you trying to appeal to?
But his point in this interview was like, it will come out as if I drop the album all at once.
Yep.
It will come out and it will disappear.
Right. That's fair.
But if I do this prolonged approach to it and I release a song at a time over a number of weeks, then people will remain interested. Now, I ordered of course, the extended package, which has extra songs on it, and there were a bunch of different versions that you could get, and I got kind of the middle ground. So we'll see what I actually
mid-tier.
We'll see what I actually got when it comes in the mail.
All right.
Well, I ordered it when it was like the pre-order, so I just popped it on there, and
it was the top.
oh, I don't know. There was,
the
a big
rarefied.
box. Yeah, a big box that was.
Yes.
I'm like, I haven't heard a note of the music, and I
Okay.
don't know that I need the big giant box. So I got them the middle ground version.
Tour? Is he touring? Or
I don't think he's
didn't
touring
he
this. He
tour?
just he
Did
just
he
finished
just
with
tour?
he just
Yeah.
finished with Porcupine Tree.
Okay.
They just finished some dates, and they've kind of left that as a we'll see.
Okay.
They have not slammed the door shut.
Slam the door, but the door is not wide open right
But
now.
yeah,
either.
it's like there's nothing planned. But
Yep.
that's not to say we couldn't decide that this is what we want. I think his approach is always, I'm doing what I like, and you might not like it, and you might like it, but I'm gonna do
Right.
it.
I'm going to
I'm
do
not
what
gonna
I'm going to do.
cater to what people are expecting. And maybe I'll do something that is like what people are expecting, but only because that's what I want to do.
Right. Well, he's had a successful career.
He
at
has,
that
and he's
level,
been all
so
over
he's been
he's like,
everywhere.
I'm going to lose people along
Yep.
the way, and maybe I'll pick them back up with a future release.
Yep.
But right now, I'm just doing what I like, which I absolutely respect. I haven't loved every single thing that he's done, but I've gotten it all.
Well, and he's also, I mean, he is now remixed and remastered
all my
so
favorites.
many classics.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the go-to.
He is
the go-to prog remixer and remaster, and
Yeah.
to think it all started with King Crimson releases. But I mean, that's a
But he's
career
all
in
over the
itself.
place
He
with
is. Oh,
those.
but
he was. Did he just do Chic?
He's done, yes,
Right?
and he did one of my
Tears for
favorite
Fears,
albums.
and
he did one of my favorite albums. Again, not a band you think of Prague, but there's a Prague album, Chicago 2. I mean,
Right?
he did it for a reason. It is
Yeah.
an amazing album, and his version, which again, what I like on Apple Music is they'll have the album name, and then in the parentheses they'll say the Steve Wilson remix.
Right.
So it's like, cool, okay, I'll go for that.
Yeah. But again, like you were saying the other day, that sometimes those remixes
they replace
the old, which you don't really want to happen.
Right.
But
right
most of the streaming platforms, you can find that version that you want.
that older one,
And
yeah.
it's, we're old school, so we are used to the thing that we're used to, and we're used to the physical media,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
that's what we want. But
right.
everyone else
Yeah.
in the world besides us is moving on to
And
just
they're fine.
streaming and listening to
Right.
whatever they want to. And if you could find it, the original mix versus
Yep.
the new mix versus the Atmos mix versus the whatever mix, as long as you can always go back to what you started with via that platform, that's good. I think your complaint was the physical media.
When the physical media
disappears, and you're stuck with.
There's nothing. It's you go search for like Genesis Trick of the Tail, and you're gonna hear the remaster from
'94
or
or whatever.
from whenever. But I will say though, as remixes and remasters go, most of the time or a lot of the time, I would pick the newer Steve Wilson remix or remake, because I don't think it's the surround one is different. But if you're just listening to it, old school, with two channels, he's very, very, respectful of the original, but the things and the choices he makes. So like Chicago 2. Thick as a brick. I haven't listened to the original since another kind of not oddball, and it's prog, Caravans in the Land of Grey and Pink, another excellent album. I wouldn't go back and listen to the original one. It's not like it's so different that you're like, oh, I could say. It's just like the overall atmosphere and the sound and the separation is just like it just sounds
it's brighter, it's better.
Yeah, it's just better.
And he unequivocally states that he is trying to stay as faithful as possible in those new stereo mixes.
Yeah.
I think he's given a little bit more leeway in the 5.1 or the Atmos because
which he should.
Because it is a different mix. It's a different approach sonically
it's
to
more of a creative
music.
process for someone
which is
like him as well. So his particular approach, like I have no complaints. I can't think of anything he's done that I like or own that I'd be like, I don't like what he did. And it's usually like, actually, this is really good. I like this a lot. And it just like is more alive.
So I'm interested to get the actual physical copy.
Right.
But I also have to give the full album, another couple listens, because there's a lot of different stuff happening on it. But a number of them are very low key.
Yep.
And they're, and sonically, I'm sure it's going to be great when I get the physical copy and I'm not just listening on my iPhone or whatever.
Did you buy vinyl or is it just?
I did not get the
Okay, so
vinyl.
is it one CD or two?
It's a one CD, but it comes.
Oh,
The one that I
bonus.
got is
Okay.
this bonus, this, that, and the other
Right.
thing.
Level.
But I think one of them comes as a vinyl
Okay.
and the CDs and the DVD, and that's the box I did not get.
Okay. All right. And Steve Wilson is not the only one with a new release out. We've got
Trevor Rabin's got a new
Trevor
album
Rabin.
coming out.
Yep.
Called Rio.
And he has way more years between his albums.
Yes, he
than
does.
Steve does.
Well, his last proper rock pop song based album was Can't Look Away, and that was like 1989 or something.
What's that Jacaranda album?
That was an instrumental only.
Oh, okay.
So that was all, that was a separate deal for him. This is more of a song based album. Right.
Yeah.
So so far there's been 3 songs released from that album, and they're all fairly different. One's a very up tempo rock pop kind of song.
Right.
And then he's got one that's a little more proggy and very very dense called Push. And then he's got a new one that just came out like 2 days ago called Oklahoma. Which is a bit more cinematic in its approach.
And so by the time we should say by the time this episode is published, it may already be out. The full one be out. So apologies that we're
so I have that on order as well as a pre-release. So
yeah, I've heard you've played. I've heard some of the new ones. It definitely reminds you of Yes in areas. And you're also like, oh, is that John Anderson? Or why not just
sing in this high register?
Why not just get John Anderson? I'm sure he would. I mean, is there bad feelings between the 3 of them after the ARW?
No, I read an interview with him where he kind of was just basically like, we did our thing.
Right.
We did our tour. We kind of said, that was great. That was fun. We're done. And then there was like, well, why didn't you record anything? And he just said, it just didn't come together. And I don't know the inner workings.
I don't either. I think Rick had comments at the time. He seemed a little more annoyed at the situation at the time. That it just kind of or more like, I don't really know what's going. Like, why are we not doing this?
And for a long time,
it all comes down to John, most likely, right?
We have no idea.
Yeah,
but at the time there was, we have half the album done.
Right.
There's so much done, and then all of a sudden it was like we have nothing, and I'm like, whoa, what was it?
Somewhere between the two.
But I'd rather they not release anything than release something that is not great.
Right. But we are getting new Trevor Rabin.
We are getting a new Trevor Rabin album.
Yes.
And what I've heard so far, it is very akin to, the Yes 80s
talk into the
vibe,
90s.
Right?
Yes. Oh, totally.
I'm sure it's going to be different. On a whole,
right?
But you're not going to get something you didn't expect if you get
if you like him, and because I would say, like you said, I mean, he had that one song based album. This I think is a little more proggish and more So if you like that era of Yes, it's definitely worth checking out because it's definitely interesting. Like I am hearing things like, oh, okay, and that, but I'm not hearing like, oh yeah, he's trying to sound like Close to the Edge. I'm thinking more like, oh, okay, yeah, this is something he could have written for talk, or that sounds like something he would do. It's very
which I think is what he was after. He's like, I'm furthering my songwriting as I have done.
Yes,
and this is just my next step in that.
But it also is like, he definitely had. He had a big hand in the sound and the composition elements of the 80s into 90s. Yes.
Oh yeah. I don't think there's any argument about that.
So it's his stuff. So that's a good release. That's great.
That should be.
So hopefully it won't be 20 some odd or 30 years between. I don't know. It's like.
He's been doing all the soundtrack work.
Why? Can I ask a question? Why is it titled? It's Rio, right?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know.
I mean.
I have it. I don't all have it yet. Okay. I just have 3 songs.
I thought you might know. Let's just leave it at that. All right. Carl Palmer.
Yeah,
Carl
this is
Palmer.
all you, buddy.
How's that for a segue? All right. So everybody who's listening to this knows, unfortunately, Keith Emerson and Greg Lake passed within a couple of years of each other. It was really quick. And Carl, Keith obviously was going through some troubles. Um, Greg had cancer, and unfortunately, he didn't survive. Um, I said this in a different episode, so I'm not going off on my rant again about how I believe Emerson Lake and Palmer is one of the worst served bands in the internet era by whoever their management or is ever running their stuff. It's just release after reprint after reprint, a lot of crappy live stuff. But anyways, Carl Palmer now is the last man standing. And, he could be around forever, that dude. I mean, he's obviously playing the drums is very physical, and he is in immaculate shape for someone of his age. He's had a band for many, many years. And I've listened to them, and it's definitely, he's not going to, I give him, kudos for being, I'm not going to go out with a guitar, with a guitar bass dude and a keyboard guy. No,
Yeah.
I'm not going to have keyboards. So he took a couple of young guys, a bass player. This is years ago. He's been doing this for many years, and a guitar player instead of Keith. And then the bass player started playing the stick as well. And so,
Okay.
so I've listened, it's interesting to hear Tarkus done completely on guitar. Now, it's a very 90s shredding kind of tone. I'm not going to go down that road. But he had his own thing. I got to give it to Carl. He plays bigger places with Asia, or did, and it's mainly small places they're playing, the Carl Palmer's legacy. So as you know, he got the permission of both Keith and Greg's estate. And he essentially does... it's not the, what do they call, hologram and all that stuff that people have tried, like Dio and that stuff.
Yeah.
It's not that. Or Frank Zappa. There was a Zappa tour with a hologram too. He's showing clips from the Royal Albert Hall show in 92, I think it was, or 94, whatever that year was. And there's a CD, and it was a video. It's a very well done video, but it's their later years, and they kind of play with them, so to speak. They play along with them. So in concept, it's like, oh, and it actually doesn't bother me too much, because I understand what he's trying to do.
In the video, Greg Lake singing?
Yes.
And they're playing along to that
yeah,
track?
they're essentially playing along to the video. But that's not all they do. It's not like that's the whole show is that.
Understood. Did they mix out everything but the keyboards and the bass and the vocal? And then they're playing along with just the track.
As far as I know and what I've seen, it's just Keith playing and Greg playing bass or guitar and singing, and then Carl and his guys are playing with ensemble are playing with it. So and to be fair, it's very tastefully done. They're not and it's not the whole show. It's a good part of the show, but it's not the whole show. At least it wasn't the stuff I've seen online. So I initially was like, what is he doing? Just get. Everybody was like, there's a lot of good keyboard players out there. And I think he rubbed people the wrong way too, because they had a Keith Emerson kind of memorial concert, and a lot of people, I think Billy Sherwood came. I don't know exactly who came, but there were a lot of people that came. And instead he played at like a club with his band. So I know that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, as opposed to doing that. He was on tour, I understand it. But I like a lot of people, had a very negative reaction when I first read about it. I'm like, oh, it's just weird. But having seen some of the videos, it's like not the approach I would choose, but it's not as bad, because they're kind of playing along. And look, he's a 1/3 of a band,
right?
And in a band like that, he was good. A lot of people knock his playing. He was very, very, very good for Emerson, Lake, and obviously Palmer. And you heard the difference if you heard three, but Emerson, Lake, and Powell. Powell was Cozy Powell is a completely different drummer. And I meant to bring it, but I will in one of our episodes. I actually have a Emerson, Lake, and Powell sweatshirt.
There you go.
That I bought at Madison Square Garden on their tour. I don't know why I bought a sweatshirt, but I was,
which is kind of funny that they were doing Emerson, Lake, and Powell, and they were at Madison Square Garden, and then
And it was full. It
and
was
then
full.
2 years later, they're doing 3, and they're at Toad's Place.
And they're at Toad's Place. And Toad's had to put things on the side of the stage to fit them all. It's strange the way it's up and down. It's strange the way it's up and down. And they didn't help, I mean, Keith obviously had a lot of issues and certainly physical issues that really brought him down. But I just never felt like, some musicians need somebody there to kind of push them. He was one of those guys, and he had Greg Lake. That was Greg Lake's role too. He was the producer. People like to bag on Greg Lake, but he kind of, obviously he was a little more of on a commercial bent. But without that, I don't think you would have had like Keith without that like caliber of musicians to kind of push him along. I just feel like that's what he needed. When he had that was the best material he ever put out. I listened to a lot of his film work and stuff.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. It's very cool, but there was something special about the three of them. So I think
then, sorry, when they're playing this new Legacy thing, ELP was not a big improv band anyway.
No.
Right?
No.
So it's not like, I mean, it's like they're playing to a track, but at the same time, they were trying to recreate what was in the studio anyway, right? So it's not like you're missing the fact that they're not going off on a tangent or jamming to something, because they weren't doing that anyway.
Not by that point. I mean, there were times in their careers where there would be parts of songs where they would jam, but I think, certainly that era, it's easy enough to follow along. And Carl was there. He knows like the ins and outs. And it's not like they're doing, Rondo America on that 15-minute extravaganza, which, to be honest, I was tiresome in the 70s. And I did see them do that in the 70s when they did it. But like, you could have played 3, 4, 5 more tracks, or you could have actually played all of Tarkus instead of playing half a Tarkus and then going into Knife Edge, which was cool. But and they do that.
This is what we complain about.
I know this is what we complain about.
You could have done this instead.
You could have done that.
You had all this time and you wasted it playing that.
Get off my prog lawn. So I guess I can't really come down hard on Carl, even though I just don't like it. It's like, I mean, who's in Asia these days? I don't
even know.
So I'm sure Billy Sherwood's in there, right? But he doesn't sing anymore. Anyways, he could have taken Billy Sherwood to play bass, and Billy sings.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I'm not sure Jeff Downs would be a good Keith Emerson replacement, but
right. I think
Rick Wakeman would have done. I mean, I'm sure. No, I'm serious. I'm sure they could have put together a package of like, let's celebrate ELP and play theaters. I'm not saying they're going to play big places.
Yeah.
And when I say theaters, I'm talking like the Ridgefield Playhouse and things like that.
Yeah, but I also can see Carl wanting to do it. That he's the last one. That this is his thing, and he's not going to bring in people to replace the people, even if it is a tribute.
I can understand that approach. It's tough. So I mean, I think he's got good intentions at heart. He has to, because he's not playing big play. It's not like this made it so all of a sudden he can play big places.
Yeah,
so
no,
I think his
it's not a
intention
money
is good.
grab.
And also, I don't view him as like, oh, he was just a drummer in this. It was a 3-person band. So he has as much right as anyone else to be out there to be doing this. Actually, he's the only one who has a right, since unfortunately Greg and Keith are no longer here. But I do know it's a lot of people, when they first heard what he was going to be doing, were like, oh, why would you do that? Why would you do that? Watch a few videos on YouTube. It's actually not that bad. It really isn't. It's not that bad. It's his way of keeping the legacy going. Carl Palmer's legacy, ELP legacy. So there you go.
There we go.
All right. So I think I went on a bit about it. I get very passionate about ELP because I just feel that they're one of my top bands, but it's a core 2 or 3 years where they were really good.
Right.
And, but I just feel like their legacy, I'm sure everybody feels this at some extent about things that they like, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like King Crimson, for whatever reason, even though when I first got into them, it was like no one was into them. No one was going to remember them. Now they have certainly in Prague and Prague adjacent music, they're very well known.
Oh yeah.
There's no doubt. But I feel like, I don't know if you
Even
feel this about some bands, but there's like ELP and another band like that I really like Jefferson Airplane. I feel them receding from the public consciousness.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that, well, of course, Prague is always receding from the public consciousness, which is why we call this Prague Will Find a Way, because somehow
True.
it does
It's
eventually
resilient, if
it
nothing
stays
else.
around.
It's resilient.
But yeah, they're not part of the conversation.
Yeah.
You know, even when talking about Prague now,
Yeah.
it's still ELP is becoming less and less prevalent than they used to be.
Right.
Now it is like King Crimson and Yes
Yeah.
and Genesis. ELP used to be like
They were
part of the top of the list.
They were a freaking huge band at the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I said, it's like that with a lot of bands and not everything. So it's not like, well, that was 40, 50 years ago. What do you expect? But as someone who really enjoyed their music, look, they didn't do themselves any favors with some of the music they put out or the way that their catalog and everything has been managed. But, you know, though all they have to be remembered for is brain salve surgery, you know, and they
Yeah.
probably will because that cover's iconic and even if the music doesn't live on, that cover will live on.
Yeah.
So I guess there's that. All right, let's end on that note.
All right.
You know, so as always, I think, you know, Jay put it best. It's, you know, Prague's resilient. It will find a way. So for the Prague Will Find a Way podcast,
We'll see you
farewell.
next time.
See you for the next episode.